Right. Well, welcome you all to Levels of Strategy, the live lecture 3. And tonight, part of what I'm going to do is really just help you complete the first strategy task worksheet. So tonight, I'll also introduce that you'll be, if you haven't already looked on a strategy worksheet that you'll be developing. And from there, work on figuring out how to move towards creating this executive summary, the strategic plan. So um, the other thing I was just sharing just before I started recording is that I am way behind on reading the papers. And so some of you already have gotten some feedback, but most of you have not. And so I will work on getting those completed this weekend. I'll be doing a little bit every day, so you may get some stuff during the week, but for sure all of them will be completed by Sunday. And what else do I want to say about that? There'll be a quiz, and I'll talk about the quiz as well. That'll be released by Thursday morning, likely. The other thing I guess I want to say as well is that we are in the process of interviewing some faculty to join our pool because as you can imagine, the program is just growing, and we're grateful that the program is growing. And so rather than have a lot of big classes, we want to be able to have some of the similar classes with smaller numbers. So hopefully no larger than 15 or 20. But like last term, I had, I don't know, over 30 students, and that just took a lot to really go through stuff. And this time we have 20 or so. And so it's taken me a while to get through all of that. So we are interviewing some faculty. And I share that because part of what we also want to do is allow them to visit our class. So check out the Canvas. They won't check out any of your work, but at least for my class, because I offer live lectures, they may join a live lecture. I don't think they're joining tonight, but probably next week or the week after, they may be part of the conversation. And that might be fun too, to be able to have see what they think about some of the material and be able to participate in some of the conversation. So they'll look at the Canvas to see what's been assigned, at least for all the classes that are happening right now. And then with mine, because I have live lectures, they may participate, but we'll see. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing. And when I ask the question, what is strategy? Part of what we're doing in this course is what I characterize as the canon. Actually, that's my door. I get loud, and the rest of the household doesn't like my loud talking. So when I talk about the canon or the hegemony, what I'm really talking about is what's the dominant narrative, if you will, of the field. And what's dominant in the field is the idea that we can actually predict and control things. The idea that we can actually say, hey, this is what the direction is that we're going, and all we have to do is set really smart goals, and all we have to do is really set some clear benchmarks, assign people certain tasks, and then we'll actually get what we want to get. I've been around a while. I'm almost 60, and so I've been a part of a lot of strategic planning processes, some of which you'll be able to see some of the strategic plans over the part, some as a consultant, some as a participant, some as a executive director, some as a board member, and all these things allow for me to be able to say, most of the time, strategic plans don't realize what's in the plan. And there's this interesting quote by Eisenhower who he says, when it comes to battle, that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. Right? And so while we may not be able to rely on the plan to have the end all be all, the act of planning is really what's much more critical. And so when I talk about strategy, I'm going to work to develop the capacity for all of you to not only think about how do we identify and articulate an intended strategy, how do we also prepare ourselves for the emergent strategies that'll arise over time? Because what's going to happen over time is that contexts change. I mean, if someone created a strategic plan in 2018, a 5-year strategic plan, my guess is they would not have predicted a pandemic. Right? My guess is they wouldn't have talked about, families having to work from home for those who could, and having to care for kids, and then also talk about some of the protests and the movements that are happening, or the significant changes in our environment, the climate crisis. For those who don't believe in climate change and think that the fires and some of the other calamities that are happening around the world are just because there's the science that suggests that humans have some contributions to what's going on. And so to be able to deny climate change is problematic. So how do we not only set an intended strategy, we also think about continuously checking our environment. But the other thing I want to offer really explicitly for me, when I'm talking about strategy, I'm talking about the ends and the means. So when we create a strategic plan, we're not only describing the goals, we're also describing how we want the goals to be achieved. So if you tell me, for example, that a strategy is the way to get there and goals are the end product, I would say that's a mistake, because a strategy is both how you're going to get there and what the goals are. So it's kind of tricky and it's kind of nuanced, but being able to understand that a strategy is the ends and the means, it's not just the means. It's just not how to get there. So strategy includes both the goals and the way to get there. So part of what we're talking about when we're creating a strategic plan is we are, as we did last week, talk about what is the vision, what is the mission, what are the values of an organization, just as what's the vision, mission, and values of you? And how does that help drive the direction you want to go and start to set some goals? So to be able to understand that, I want to first step back and say, I am really in love, probably have a super duper intellectual crush on Adrienne Marie Brown, who wrote Emergent Strategy, one of the optional books I offered. But one of the things that she's done that's quite beautiful is being able to look at nature and say, how does nature respond and sense what's going on? And she comes up with these ideas of, hey, there's the fractal element, there's the adaptive element of nature, there's interdependence, and there's decentralization. There isn't a centering of decision-making within nature. It is nonlinear, it's iterative, right? Things are changing on a more cyclical process rather than from A to B. And there's resilience. And in some ways, the environment is saying, this is what you're giving us, and this is what you're getting in return, right? So there's a justice element to it. And for me, at the same time, the environment is always creating many, many opportunities. So part of what we're gonna think about when we sense the environment and respond, we're thinking about the relationship between the small and the large, right? And part of what we need to understand is, what is our understanding of how change happens? Like, how do you think change happens? Is it by thinking it? Well, if I think I wanna get in shape, and I know all the good foods to eat, and I know what it means to exercise, is that enough for me to change? Actually, I know it's not enough for me to change, because I know what healthy is. I know some good exercises. Again, I'm a Zumba instructor, and I know what I did, you know, Insanity and all these different workouts on CDs and DVDs and things. And it's not knowing what sticks. It's, for me, it was the environment. It was a habit. So I had to change not only my heart and mind, I had to change my practices around eating, shopping. I actually had to create the conditions as well that allow me to not have a fridge that allows me to have too much of this or too much of that. I actually bought smaller plates so I could have smaller portions at different meal times. So I was thinking about the conditions and all of the other things, right? So part of what we think about in an emergent strategy is being able to understand the nature of elements. The other thing that I come from is really being able to say, what are the principles that I consider, and what are the principles in action, and what are the principles in my context? And so what I appreciated about Adrienne Marie Brown is she lists out, hey, these are the principles of emergent strategy. The idea, and I'll just talk about a couple of them, right? Small is good and small is all. The idea of, if we just think over macro, the macro is really the micro is a microcosm of the macro, right? So being able to understand relationships and families is a way to understand organizations. Organizations is a way to understand communities. Understand communities is a way to understand cities, is a way to understand the state, is a way to understand the country. So to think that we can only understand the global stuff and not understand interactions at the micro level, we're missing something. The other thing that I appreciate is never a failure, always a lesson. So I know when I was raising my son, we didn't say we made mistakes. We always said, oops, another LO, oops, another LO, oops, another LO. What's an LO? A learning opportunity. Of course, he started making fun of me because he thought my whole life was a learning opportunity. But part of what the challenge is to kind of think about when we look at mistakes, we don't see that they're often made of the same material from which wisdom emerges, right? So how do we say, what's the lesson that we're gathering in this moment? And the other thing that I'm going to push you when we talk next week about doing the SWOT analysis, or at least collecting data, is are we approaching people from a place of trust or untrust or distrust, right? And I tend to believe that if you trust the people, they become trustworthy. But if you don't trust the people, they become untrustworthy, right? So it's sort of a interesting paradox. And I'm going to talk later about, there's always going to be those opportunities for us to choose what to feed in the ways that we're trying to develop and emerge. So, and then the last thing that I want to just point out is this one about what you pay attention to grows. So whenever you look at something, are we going to look at the problems? Because if we only look at the problems will grow. If we also look at the achievements and the accomplishments, we can also believe that accomplishments must grow. So in some ways, part of what we're practicing over time is that of equanimity. We're not too attached or too averse to either accomplishments or to challenges, right? So I'm asking you in this class to choose 1, 2, or 3 levels of strategy to focus on, right? And I'm going to go into each of these. So in some ways, the first strategy, and let me actually say that while I'm going to share these from corporate level to business level to functional level, it doesn't mean one is bigger or more important than the other, nor does it mean one needs to happen before the other. In some ways, small is all, as well as let's look at this systemically. So part of what you're being asked to do is when you're looking at your organization, or even if it's looking at yourself, what's your corporate or organizational level strategy? Meaning, what is your position in the industry? When we talk about the business level strategy, we're really talking about how is it that you're going to compete? And even if you're a nonprofit or a government agency or even a school, it's not so much that you're competing with other governments. I mean, you might be, but really it's how are you getting the word out about your products, services, and resources, right? And when we're talking about the functional level strategy, we're really talking about how are things coordinated, right? So where does the specialization occur? And so what I said, and the reading talks to this, depending on where you are, you might decide to focus on one of these 3, 2 of these 3, or all 3. So I'll give you some food to consider to figure out what makes most sense for you. And if you want some support in deciding what makes most sense for you, definitely set up an appointment to chat with me, and we can go ahead and work that through. But before I go and explain all those levels of strategy, what I also wanted to say that, and this is building off of some of the things you'll be having in other classes, I'm often working with organizations and say, I'm not creating a strategic plan with you, we're actually creating a sustainability plan. So as I shared last week, not only do I kind of stray away now from doing strategic plans because I focus more on theories of change and then work with organizations to create 1 or 2 year work plans that say what's the direction and what are the financial resources that are necessary. When I am working on strategic plans, it really is how do we become sustainable? And when I talk about sustainability, we're talking about sustainable for the organization, for the community, as well as for the programs that you are. And for some organizations, nonprofits in particular, sometimes they're trying to work themselves out of a job. Like, we don't want to keep helping homeless. We want homeless to not exist, right? So how is it that their nonprofit is working towards address the issue of homelessness so that there would be no more homelessness and then they would work themselves out of a job? But that's really focusing on community sustainability. Again, Kurt's class talks a little bit more about this, but I want to let you know that I'm often thinking about the natural environment as well as economic vitality, as well as what it means to have healthy communities. So when we're talking about corporate level strategy, another way to think about it is really to say organizational level strategy. And we're asking ourselves, in what set of businesses should we be in? And that often gets answered from the vision, mission, and value statements, right? So this is our vision, this is our mission, and this tells us what we're gonna do. And when you're focusing on your organizational level strategy, you tend to not only answer what set of businesses are you in, you also tend to answer, are we gonna grow? Are we gonna retrench? Or are we gonna be stable? And most organizations, as you can imagine, are really retrenching right now. There are very few organizations that are really talking about growth. Ironically, for me, my consulting has really taken off in this time because a lot of the work I do is around anti-racism, organizational change within contexts like diversity issues and equity issues and inclusion. So with the pandemic, and then also with the protests and the institutional racism stuff, organizations don't want to be reflective of those organizations that are characterized as oppressive, right? So while my practice has grown, some of what I've had to do is work with organizations to figure out how to retrench. For some, it's actually how to remain stable given the context and how to pivot on a regular basis. So a corporate level strategy or organizational level strategy will provide the direction for whether to grow, retrench, or sustain, right? As well as answer the question, what should businesses should we be in? When we're talking about business level strategy, we're asking the question, how do we let folks know about our programs or our products or about our services? So we're answering the question, how should we compete in each of our businesses? And things we need to consider is, are we competing by being innovative? Are we differentiating ourselves from others? Are we trying to reach a broad stroke of customers, or are we narrowing our focus on customers? So much in what we'll do, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in 2 weeks, but if you really want to think about, hey, this is my level of strategy, program level strategy, how do I make sure that people know about what we're doing and that people are accessing my products, programs, or services? This is really what you're kind of talking about. And so there's a great chapter that talks about this grid. But part of what you're answering, again, is how competitive you want to be, or where do you want to be competitive? Is it by going broad or going narrow? And then are you going to be unique, meaning you might have a higher cost, or are you going to be not so unique and you might have a lower cost to your services? And part of that is trying to figure out the balance. When we're talking about functional level strategy, also known as operational level strategy, we're asking the question, how do we coordinate and strengthen our resources? So what we're often asking are 4 questions, right? How are decisions made, right? So we're asking that. The third one, are we centralizing it? Which often means, a higher hierarchy. Or are we decentralizing it? Which usually means a flatter organization. How are people doing their jobs? Are they doing many of the same things? So we're standardizing it. So all the program assistants are doing the same thing so they can work with any different program assistant. Or are we a flat law firm where everyone is a generalist? So that's mutual adjustment. They're trying to do some of the things that we're doing more generalist-like work than specialist-like work. Do we need to be fluid, right? So can we be changing our structure on a regular basis? And reinventing organizations talks a lot about that, how there's a lot of autonomy and shared leadership. Or do we pretty much know how rigid we're going to be? So we're much more mechanistic. Again, this is answering the question, how do we coordinate and strengthen our resources? And when I'm talking about resources, I'm talking about how do we coordinate and strengthen people, finances, technology, and programming, right? So how are we coordinating that stuff? And how are we strengthening that stuff? How are we strengthening people, finances, technology, and programs? Now, what you've also heard me say is that I think our work is as designers of organizations. And so you'll hear me say, and I probably already said this 3 or 4 times, I'm asking us to be harder on the structure and softer on the people. And what I mean by that is, how do we design the conditions that cultivate and nurture our whole selves? How do we design a structure and system that cultivates and nurture self-determination, autonomy, clarity of purpose, rather than trying to coerce people to say, you need to be whole, or you need to be this, or you need to be this title, or you need to be able to just do what I say, right? Because we also want to create an organization, I think, that is evolving towards a noble purpose. And that again comes from vision, mission, and values. So when we're thinking about being organizational leaders who design those conditions, we have to understand what the relationship is between strategy and structure. Now, there are those, and I won't get too theoretical, but Henry Drucker is one of them, and Henry Mintzberg is another, who would say that there's limitations on the strategy imperative, right? There's so many organizations over the years saying, what's your strategy? What's your strategy? What's your strategy? And what they have offered is that in some ways, this idea of strategy is done, right? Just as bureaucracies are done. Part of what we need to work on is, again, not trying to figure out how to predict and control, but we need to figure out how to be much more sensing our environment and responding and being able to pivot. So this idea of being able to create a strategic plan that's 5 to 10 years out is not as imperative as being able to say, do we have the capabilities to sense and respond to our environment and adapt accordingly? And with that, the question then follows, could strategy follow the structure? And the way I think about it is, I think about who are the people that we have in our organization, and what is it that the people do best? And how do we think about the people that we have on the bus and then choose a direction for the bus to go? The other way to think about it is to say, I want to design the bus, and then I figure out which people to get onto it, right? So the second is the idea that strategy can follow structure, meaning that strategy can be determined by who you already have. Who are you already serving? What is your history? What is your present? And then you can figure out the future. And the future is the strategy. The other way is to say, where do we want to go? And what does it take for us to get there? And so how do we create the people, the finances, the technology, and the programs to get us there? So that's, again, structure following strategy. I'm not arguing for one or the other. In fact, part of what we're doing in this class is we're doing both. We're being eclectic. We're actually being emergent strategists as well as deliberate strategists. And part of that is being able to understand that sometimes the structure will follow strategy. At the same time, the strategy will need to adapt to the structure. And then the other thing I want to mention when considering the strategy structure relationship is that your industry will also influence the structure. Not always, but often, right? So for example, healthcare, you know, Kaiser Permanente across the country is, at least my brother works in healthcare, and he's not at Kaiser. So he calls them the evil empire in some ways. But part of what he's suggesting is that they're starting to dictate how it's supposed to be, or how it's supposed to be systematized in healthcare, where he prefers it to be much more flexible and flatter. But now what's happening, because of insurance and health coverage, it is becoming much more structured. Similarly, schools, right? Our education system, it really emerged from the change of the agricultural to the industrialized period. So a lot of, when you think about periods, right? First period, second period, third period in high school, for example, the idea there was that you wanted to be able to treat students as widgets and give them pieces of the widgets so that they can put it together when they live out in the world. Now we know that most educational environments actually deter folks to be able to be whole when they graduate. So that's part of the reason why the industry is now actually changing its structure. Technology is very different than bureaucracies, right? Government structures. So government has a certain kind of structure. Technology has a much more flatter structure, right? So just looking at the field, grocery chains have very different structures than gardening chains, right? Amazon has changed a lot in terms of its organizational structure in its industry compared to brick and mortar stores, right? So really being able to understand what does the industry suggest for the kinds of structure. Now, I've said a lot of things about developing a strategic plan, but part of what I got a question about is there any way you can just turn strategic plans into 5 things? Where last week or 2 weeks ago, I talked about how we're really answering the question, what matters, what's difficult, what's possible. Part of what we need to understand is that the canon or the dominant way of understanding strategic plans is really we're doing 5 things. We're determining our domain, like where are we going to do our work? We're making a strategic forecast. We're predicting the environment, the political, economic, social, cultural, technological, environmental, legal, economic environments, and then determining how our strengths and weaknesses will yield success or not in those environments, and how do we leverage opportunities and threats. And from there, you set specific objectives. So that in a nutshell is what we will be doing. While I'm teaching you this canon or what's dominant in the field, I'm also going to say this stuff is problematic. So hopefully you can rest with that tension and paradox that while I'm teaching you what's dominant in the field, I'm also saying there's some pros and cons to it. Just as when I'm talking about emergent strategy, there are likely some pros and cons there. What I'm going to ask you to do from that is not feel like you have to figure out what Renato's right is to do your work. I'm going to encourage you to choose what your good is, what your right is, what your wise is. And then we'll just go from there. Now, so this week, because I'm asking you to choose, you may not be able to choose so readily, but I'm going to ask you to make a best guess on whether you're choosing a business level strategy, a corporate level strategy, or a functional level strategy. And depending on what you're going to choose, you're going to read more deeply a specific chapter. And if you're not going deeply in that chapter, at least skim it. You should have competence. I mean, I'm developing your competence, at least be familiar with each of these levels of strategy. And part of what you'll find when we have conversations or when I see the levels of strategy you choose, I will say, you know, that's not actually a business or programmatic level strategy. That's a functional level strategy. Or you think you're working on a functional level strategy. That's actually a corporate level strategy. Or I might say, you know, the issues you're facing, you're actually doing all 3 levels of strategy. So whatever you land on, don't feel like you have to get it right. You will get some feedback and we'll work together to figure out what makes sense in terms of the workload, given the amount of time that we have. So the strategy worksheet, you can look ahead if you want, but part of what I would encourage you to do is be okay taking on the pace that I'm offering. Because if you go too far and fill out everything, you're just going to have to do many of it again. What I'd rather you do, rather than try to go fast through all the entire strategy worksheet, is go at a very deep and deliberate pace with the current task at hand. So this week, I'm asking you to work and decide and share why you're choosing the level of strategy that you're choosing. What's your rationale? And then how might you go about gathering data to understand where you are at your current level of strategy and what are the problems about it. You're not going to collect data yet, but you want to at least say, where will you get that data? I'm also asking you to upload your assignment from LDRS 321, Rich's class. And if you didn't take Rich's class, don't sweat it. I'm asking you to upload your signature assignment just so that I can get a sense of what is your level of, I don't know if competence is the right word, but just how is it that you've already been doing some data-driven leadership, right? And so that assignment, and if you want to include the memo that you also had to do, that would be helpful for me to understand how you make sense of things, right? So I'm going to look at that, not to grade it, just most of you say, did you turn it in or not? But part of what I'll look at is to say, hey, how might that assignment be used for the SWOT analysis that we'll do next week, right? And I also understand that some of you are already changing and making pivots to the organization you're focusing on. So I've already gotten feedback that, hey, the organization that I did my signature assignment on for Rich's class isn't the same organization that I'm working on now. That's cool. I still want to see what you did just to kind of see how you approach the work and what you actually produced. So I don't need to look at the narrative necessarily. I just want to look at or make some inferences of your skill set. And then from there, we'll be able to kind of start to see what are the emerging strategic priorities that you'll need to consider. And then over time, task 4, 5, 6, and 7 will all be done in a week. And that might sound like a lot, but it's not. Because by that point, we'll also stop doing discussions, and all you'll be focusing on is, not all, but most of what you'll be doing is pulling all the previous tasks together to complete tasks 4, 5, 6, and 7. And as you fill out that strategy worksheet, you will then have the nuggets and elements for your final 2 signature assignments, the executive summary and your video presentation. So what's coming up, right? So as usual, hopefully you're putting in your discussions, your initial discussions on Thursday, and then commenting on your colleagues by Sunday. And if you do both, then you'll get the full 3 points, and hopefully all 15 points of the 100 points, with 15 points for the discussions. Now, if you feel like you want to go back and let me know, oh, I only got 2 points and I didn't comment on my colleagues. If you want to let me know that you did comment on your colleagues, I can go ahead and change that. That's not a problem. As I've already said, the quiz will be available this Thursday. And then after that, I will actually, you can do it now if you want. Over the next 2 weeks, I think you can access my calendar. I can put that in the chat. Or actually, maybe I should put that. So I'll email it out. But folks, if you want to, go to calendly.com/Renato Almanzor, and then choose a time. And choose a time, 15, 30 minutes. Ideally, 15 minutes I think is enough. But if you feel like you want 30 minutes, you can do that too. But those are optional. You don't have to do it. At those meetings, what we'll do is have a conversation about how you think the course is going, get any feedback, give any feedback to me, and then I will give you some feedback on the work that you've submitted, and then talk about whatever else you might want to need in order to be successful in the course. So that's my talk for tonight. I want to pause and open it up to see if you all who are on have any questions or curiosities or clarifications. So yeah, what I will say is that if you took notes, but and I'll make the slides available probably as soon as I figure out how to use my new computer and turn it into PDF and then send it to you all. I put everything on OneDrive, and I don't know now I don't know how to save and access everything so well. But anyway, all that to say, the PDF with the recording will be uploaded sometime in the next, I don't know, hour or so. I forgot how long it takes. And if not tonight, first thing tomorrow morning. But the other thing I guess I want to say to that is that in my lecture tonight, there are at least 2 questions that are on the quiz. And then some of the other questions are definitely from earlier reading or the reading you're about to do, as well as other lectures. So any questions or clarifications from any of you? It's good to see you. Thanks for joining me.
Okay.
Crystal or Iris or Leslie or Brandy or Laura? Anything coming up?
I don't have a question. Is there any way that if for future lectures we could do even like a half hour earlier? I'm in Eastern time, so it's like 10:30 right now.
Yeah. So like even 6:30? I probably could.
Yeah.
I could do that on a Sunday, like at 6 o'clock or something.
Yeah.
Are anybody able to do morning? I like morning lectures, but that's me. But people probably got work and stuff, or.
Yeah, I mean, I could schedule it on my work day and stuff because it'll be like afternoon for me.
Yeah. What about others, Laura or Iris or Leslie?
I'm pretty flexible. I can do mornings too.
Okay.
I have to
I-
work during the week, so I couldn't do. It's not ideal for me mornings, but I can always watch it out.
Yeah.
Maybe we could do like a trade-off for like mornings or afternoons.
Yeah. Or I can do an afternoon on a Sunday. But then that just messes up Sundays, right? And especially I think football starts.
I'm available in mornings as well too, so if need be.
Yeah, but thank you for letting me know that, Crystal. Yes, I can aim to try to at least do a couple at 6 or 6:30. Then we can go from there.
Yep, but I think the class is going well. I have because of COVID, everything's kind of been really impacted at the business, and we've been busier than we've projected
Yeah, sure.
industry. So it's been, just staying up late and reading and getting everything done. So, but I like the class.
Great, thank you. Yeah, what's working or what would you all want to change? What changed?
I think for me, everything is working. I think the phase and the assignments, I mean, everything is, I think it's pretty flexible and everything's working, at least on my end, for the schedule. So
Thanks. Were you going to say something, Leslie?
Oh, I just said it's good. I don't have any issues. I think it's going well how it is.
Okay. All right. And then again, I just want to offer that the one-on-ones with me also don't have to be limited to the course, right? So I do other work and just like any of the faculty, I think they would be happy to make themselves accessible and available to you all. So I do coaching, I do consulting, I've been an administrator, I've done this work. And so even if you want to talk about life after the program, if that's any of what you're interested in, we can also squeeze that into the conversation as well. And it doesn't even have to happen this week, right? You can always schedule a time with me, but I really wanted to focus on giving folks feedback around, week 4, because we're going to be halfway through next week, really. So isn't that crazy? So time goes fast and it's especially difficult given the times that we're in, as Crystal said, right? So I really admire the work that you all are doing, and I really appreciate your entrusting me with your stories and your work, and I really admire the way that you all are corresponding with each other as well. That's admirable. That tends to happen anyway by the time the class comes to me. I mean, you all have been with each other a few times, so it's pretty cool. Yeah, Laura?
I wondered if you had some advice or if you could talk a little more. In the first lecture, you talked about how important it is to be open. And I shared a little bit about that's going to be a real struggle for me because a lot of my past work was really around strategic planning. And I'm feeling really challenged to take on some of these new concepts and this new vocabulary. I understand what it all means, but I keep trying to pack it into these other frameworks that I have used and know. And I'm finding I'm constantly struggling.
Okay. Yeah, so here's what I would say is that the strategy worksheet is definitely happening with respect to the canon, what's dominant in the field. And so my assumption is that your experience with strategic planning has probably been with the quote unquote standard or typical way that strategic planning is happening. And just like with everything, I wouldn't say that that's inherently or intrinsically bad. I would say that's actually very effective. I only believe that it's not necessarily always ethical. So that's just Renato's bias, just to kind of be really clear. Mm-hmm. So part of what I would say, like everything I'm offering, take what makes sense and leave the rest. So I'm not gonna be grading you on whether you do things the way I might do it. I'm gonna be assigning grades according to the rubric that's in the syllabus, but really as your demonstration of due diligence, your demonstration of clarity of thought, clarity of expression. And when I say expression, it's in writing, right? As well as by the final assignments, also in video, right? So all that to say, hopefully what this class will allow you to do is maybe broaden and deepen some of the way that you're already doing it. I don't know if being open means you have to change. In fact, I would say, I hope you don't. Right? I think it really is being able to get more in touch with what's already divine in you. And that's cool.
Thank you.
Any other questions? And I know probably even saying the word divine might be triggering for some people, and that's all right too. Yeah. All right. Well, again, I thank you for joining me, and I will aim for a 6 or 6:30 Sunday or Monday next week. Actually, I can't do Monday at 6 because I have a board meeting, but maybe Sunday. We'll see. That'll be fun. I'll try to, and if it's not next week, at least soon thereafter. All right. Well, have a good rest of the day, evening. Go to sleep, Crystal.
Yeah.
And then for the rest of you watching the recording, you know, may what you heard tonight benefit you in your work. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.